Okay, we are live over channel 18.
Great. I just realized that I'm appearing here as Debbie Oakes, so let me change that real quick. Okay. All right. So this is the August 3rd, 2020 meeting of the Orleans Animal Control and Regulation Task Force, which I am now calling to order. And I have roll call first, but I guess maybe it makes more sense to get a clerk first so we can have somebody take the roll call. Is there somebody who'd like to step up and be the clerk this evening? Can you hear me?
Can hear you just fine, Carl.
Okay, good.
Unmute.
So would somebody volunteer to be the clerk and then we can do the roll call?
No one's volunteering.
Who hasn't done it in a while?
It's hard to say. It's been so long.
All
I know
right.
I haven't, but I'm not going to be reliable next week or two. I'm changing jobs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, would you mind just doing it for tonight, and then we'll put you last in the queue so that you don't have to do it for a while?
In progress.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. All right, so let's call the roll. And so I'm Carl Oakes. I'm here.
Dave Abel.
Patty Platten. Patty Platten.
Ed Bagdonis.
All right. And we have a quorum, so we're good to go. And so we're at number 3 already, which is the introduction of Andrea Reed as their new ex officio member, replacing Dave Currier. And Andrea, I'm thrilled to have you. Is there anything you would like to tell us?
Other
before we
than
start?
we need you guys to get your work done. That's it.
Okay.
Not live.
Well, I want to say that I know you to be a very organized and also a very intelligent and ethical person, and I welcome all of those qualities. I'm really, really happy to have you. So I'll just say that. Public comment. Do we have anything? How would that show up, Andrea? How would we know if we had some? Would they show up as a window?
No. Somebody would have had to write to you before
Okay.
or reach out. Yeah, they would have reached out to Sarah and Sarah would have let you know.
Okay. To my knowledge, I have not received public comment. So if anybody sent something and I didn't get it, it was, it's not intentional. It's in some spam folder or something along those lines. All right, moving on to minutes. We have some minutes issues. And I'm going fast. Please don't feel like I'm steamrolling. If somebody wants to jump in, please do. I'm just trying to make sure we get to the meaty stuff as quickly as we reasonably can. Somebody took the minutes of the March 2nd meeting, and to my knowledge, I never received them. March 2nd was the last meeting we had before the COVID. Does anyone recall taking the minutes or who took those minutes?
They're important meeting minutes because there were some interesting things discussed. So I actually don't recall who it was.
Yeah, one of the things that was discussed was the alternate kind of path to defining control.
Yes.
If that rings a bell for anybody, that was a meeting where Bob and Ed had collaborated on an approach to just defining what control of a dog would look like, as opposed to another approach we had, which was geared towards what behaviors are we trying to make people responsible for, what dog behaviors. Does anybody recall taking notes on that conversation?
Bob and I were presenting, so it wasn't us.
Yeah, right.
David is holding up his finger.
I'll get my 3-ring binder just to see if I have notes. I don't think I did, but let me grab it.
You know what? You don't have to interrupt the meeting for that. You can just check after, and if you have them, send them to me if you want. I have to get them
Okay,
at some point.
Yep.
All right. So I'll wait to hear from you, and then if you don't have them, I'll follow up with other people. There are a bunch of minutes which are not posted on the website. Those would be the 2 sets of January minutes and the 2 sets of February minutes from 2020. I'll tell you my story of what I remember about them. I have a giant pile, by the way, of papers. These are all my papers from all of our meetings, and it's generally, when I filed things, I tended to get copies of them. So if I filed them, I probably have copies. They're probably in there, but they never made it to the website, or something else happened. Here's my recollection. On one of the meetings, there were 3 sets of minutes that we had to approve because there had been a backup. And so we approved all 3, and then somebody was responsible for taking all 3 and filing them. I have a faint memory that I was responsible and that I actually did file them, but I wouldn't swear to it in a court of law. Then there was a 4th set of minutes, which I think were the last February meeting that we had. And I don't know who took responsibility for those. All of this can be determined by looking at the video and by looking at the end of the meeting and seeing who said they were going to file them and all that. And we can track it down. But I just wonder if anybody has any useful recollection on any of this. Okay. I will.
We're gonna have to go. We're gonna have to go back to recollections are quite hazy at this time. We put OTARF down for the duration, so we're gonna have to go back and try to scrounge up what we've got. So
yeah. And we do have a lot of, we have at least the minutes that I sent out to be approved. We may not have the changes we made. I don't know, but hopefully we do. So we'll have to I'm going to look into what I have. If you have papers sitting around from our meetings, maybe if you sifted through them and see if by accident, you volunteered to take a set of meeting minutes in and you didn't take them. The other possible person I'm going to have to speak to is Dave Currier, because I know at one point he was doing it because he was going to town hall anyway. So it's possible that he had something to do with that. All right. Is it okay if I move on to C, proper subject of minutes? Can we just get a consensus about what we're putting into the minutes? And Andrea, maybe you can speak to whether there's kind of a common understanding in the town as to what goes in and what doesn't.
Well, if you take a look at select board minutes, those meetings can often be 4.5 hours. The minutes are often a couple of pages. So you want to distill, just good common sense. You want to distill if you're reaching conclusions, if you're taking votes, if you're recommending, when you're finishing work. Your minute by minute, blow by blow discussions do not belong in the minutes.
Okay. That was my impression. So if we can just go forward on that common understanding, can we have a consensus around there? Is there anyone who feels that having kind of that minimalist and functional approach to the minutes is a problem?
Totally agree. When I did minutes, it was basically bullets.
Oh, yours were beautiful.
That was it.
I happen to
Well, I'm
think
lazy, so.
Oh no, yours were really
You're busy,
wonderful. I
Dave.
loved
You're
yours.
busy, not lazy.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So let's move on. Quick reminder as to open meeting law requirements. We cannot discuss anything as a quorum, meaning there cannot be 4 of us who discuss any issue that relates to the substance of what the committee is about. I assume, Andrea, that it's okay if it's superly obviously procedural, like if, do you want to meet at 6:15 instead of 6? that those conversations are not covered by the open meeting law. Am I correct about that?
I'm sorry, I don't understand. You have a quorum. You can conduct any business on your agenda that you see fit.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking
Okay.
about offline conversations.
Oh, offline, outside of a meeting,
Yeah,
no, you cannot deliberate in any fashion on anything that is part of your purpose.
like purpose and charge. So that, but that wouldn't be procedural. Like we could talk about, hey, we're going to start the meeting 10 minutes late, right?
Well, you can, well, except that that affects public access. So
Hmm,
you need to make those decisions about meeting time in your meetings.
Okay.
Because the public takes their cue from that.
Okay. All right. And is it fair to say that you can't like work around that by like, I can't talk to Bob and then talk to Ed and then talk to Dave and then talk
Yes, you
to
can.
Patty?
Of
I
course you
can?
can. Of course you can, yes.
And that's not kind of cheating in a way?
Carl, let's,
Okay.
yeah,
all right.
you are not to have multiple, if your quorum is 4,
Hmm.
more than 2 of you is, I mean, yeah, you've got, one-on-one conversations are private, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But anything beyond that, don't do it. Yes, it's a
Okay.
violation of open meeting law to come to some deliberation and principle. You can
Right.
test your thinking, though. You can have a
Test your
conversation. with
thinking.
somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
And I
That's
just
a
want to
good-
know, unless I'm wrong, but trying to change the meeting time, if you're doing it, you're allowed to do that, I believe, as long, we're going to post it publicly before
Yes.
the meeting happens anyway. So
Right.
we shouldn't paralyze ourselves by saying, well, geez, we got to change it from Wednesdays to Thursday or some
Right.
hour change or something. Don't get stuck on that. Life is too short. and then it gets posted publicly, as so then it's not an issue.
All right.
But, right,
You
yeah,
don't have to deliberate on it in a meeting, with a quorum.
I like the idea of the conversation being about testing your thinking, not about trying to, decide or build, coalitions or something along that line. All right, is that okay then? Can we move on from there to 7? All right, very brief recap of task force history, general work plan status. I'm going to this for 2 reasons. One is for Andrea's benefit, just to know, so she knows kind of what has happened. And the other is just kind of to build a common memory and understanding of where we've been. So we started meeting in September, which I think means we've met a dozen times, because September, October, November, December, January, February, and 2 meetings a month would mean that we've had 12 meetings. This is our 13th meeting. We had, I think, 4 meetings of that with 1 chair. And then I believe that on the 5th meeting, I started chairing, and that at that point, we generated objectives. And that then we had some conversation about the dog park. Then we wrote an interim report. And then we just made an effort to see if there were regulatory changes which were simple enough that we could kind of get them through the strainer, so to speak, and make them available to the town by the end of February. And eventually, there's kind of a combination of that taking longer than we thought it would for each item or most items, and eventually John Kelly just saying to us that it was too late. So we ended that, having done a pass on everything and being in the midst of a kind of alternative way of approaching, one of 2 ways of approaching the issue of control. And so we were kind of not quite done with that when we stopped. But regardless, nothing made it through the strainer of being simple. Is there anyone who remembers things differently, or feels that I've left something out, or that I've mischaracterized anything? Or is that an accurate statement of our history, more or less?
Can't hear Ed.
Ed, I can't hear you. Is there anything I'm supposed to do about that?
You
Big
can try
brother.
unmuting.
Ed, you're muted.
I don't think I have that control.
No,
I can
Sarah's
speak for Ed. I think you did a good job.
Thank you, Dave.
He can shake his head or nod his head, you know?
Right. Bang on the thing.
All right, all right.
Okay.
Bob, is there anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. All right, so that's where we were. And then, so number 8, review and clarify the permissible and appropriate scope of our inquiry as related to the charge. So the reason I put this on the agenda is that we had some scope questions. Some scope questions were raised, like should we be talking about this? Is this in the scope of our charge? And we got to the stage in the conversation of, well, I think it is, and somebody else thinks it isn't. But we really didn't resolve that. We really didn't kind of dig into what the thought process might be behind thinking that something was or wasn't in scope. So I guess I want to give us the opportunity to do that now. If there's anything in the whole business that we've already been through, or in what we see in our objectives that looks like it might not be appropriate matter for us to consider, let's talk about that now. Let's explore that, and let's so that we can come to a consensus about it, and then move on, all being on the same page. Are there any thoughts that anybody would like to offer about that? Yes, sir. David.
Yeah, I was reversed. Just a question. So are you referring to the charge, or are you referring to other topics that have come up along the way?
Well, no, the charge itself has to be in scope.
Right, right.
Anything that's written in the charge is something we have to do.
Right.
And then we had some leeway to kind of go beyond the literal words of the charge and consider things that might be relevant to the decisions that we would make. So a good example of that would be.
Could I just jump in for a second? Are
Yeah,
you referring to
please.
the document, Carl, that says charge tasks and parking lot items allocated to objectives with potential additional objectives, that document? Is that where you're referring to? Just so I have something concrete.
Yeah, that's one of the documents. I mean, one of the documents is just the bare charge. Okay, that's just the thing that we got from the select board.
Right.
Another document that's relevant here. There are three relevant documents to this conversation, or arguably even 4. But the one is the charge. The second is the interim report in which we generated objectives that were related to that charge. The third is the document that you just, I think, are talking about, where I made a tentative effort to kind of correlate the objectives to the charge items, and the parking lot items to the objectives, so that everything was kind of sifted, every objective was married to a charge item somehow, and every parking lot item was contextualized to an objective. Is that clear, or is that like?
Well, I was just trying to make sure as to what your question was. Are we agreeing that this is something different? So I'm just I didn't print all of them, so I don't have that in front. But I didn't think I had, or at least my recollection is I didn't have anything from prior that I thought we should change significantly. But that's just my recollection.
Yeah. Well, so my question, let me just give you a brief illustration that's very simple. Like we know that we're talking about dog poop laws.
Mhm.
And in the course of talking about dog poop laws, it became apparent that people's expectation of getting caught might be relevant to that, to whether increasing the fine would actually work or not. So that kind of took us into a whole, related question of how would we change people's perceptions of getting caught, and how might we also change the sort of cultural sense around leaving poop on the ground that would help support this law. So these are the kinds of peripheral things that, the charge doesn't say, look into how to make people feel like they're going to get caught. But we decided that that was relevant. So we have a bunch of stuff like that. And what I'm inviting us to do now is to look at those, start by looking at the objectives and just ask the question, is there stuff here that we, upon reflection, doesn't seem relevant to what our charge is? Is there stuff here that's just kind of extraneous? And I'm asking this because, and then I'm going to ask it about the specific regulatory proposals, because I want to clean out if there are scope issues, and if a persuasive case can be made that we shouldn't do this, then let's get that out of the way now before we put work into it. And then somebody says, why are we putting work into this? But when it's not relevant, let's get that cleaned out today. So looking at our charge and looking at our objectives, which are on page 5 of the interim report, I could read through them, I guess, or if that would be helpful. If there's anybody who doesn't have documents here, let me just open that up. Okay, here it is. All right. So here are the chart. To identify specifics of dissatisfaction, if any, within the community pertaining to existing Town of Orleans dog regulations and enforcement. Does anyone feel that that's not something we should be doing? All right, how about just stop me if I hit something? I won't ask the question every single time. I'll just pause after each one. To assist summer visitors, part-time residents, and guests from neighboring towns to understand and respect Orleans dog regulations. To engage local government agencies, businesses, and community organizations in helping Orleans remain a recognized dog-friendly town. See, I actually have a comment about this one. I wonder if this one doesn't kind of assume a result, okay? And in other words, maybe there are people on the committee who don't think it's important that Orleans should remain a recognized dog-friendly town. So I'm wondering whether conceivably this ought to be reframed and into something like documenting.
I have a question, Carl.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time on the objectives and defining them and discussing them, and the consensus about the objectives as they're reflected in the interim report was that they are our objectives, and the work that we were doing is slotted into them. So are we revisiting this because we're refrequenting ourselves with this, or are we visiting it because we have questions about whether we want to change what's here?
I would say both. Certainly, I think we need to reacquaint ourselves with this after 5 months. I personally don't remember all of these. They're not forefront of my mind. And if we are going to make a work plan where we decide what we're doing and what we're doing first and so forth, it seems to me I could just say, go off and read this on your own and familiarize yourself. If you want me to skip, this kind of process of reading through, that's fine. But the other
So
thing is,
I think it's very valuable for us to go through this because all of our memories are quite foggy. A lot has happened. There's been a lot of stress
Yeah.
in the time that we haven't been here. So just going through these and I think my first bullet item is we're going to spend a good chunk of this meeting reviewing what we've done
yeah,
and getting our heads wrapped around where we were.
absolutely.
So that's it. And so
Yeah.
I don't see anything in these charges or these objectives that I would elect to change personally. Other people might feel different, but it's important to sort of look at them because it jars our memories as to what we need to, focus on. I'm assuming we still believe that the objectives are succinct.
Well, I just want to make sure because I want to give, it's kind of like at the wedding where you say, speak now or forever hold your peace. I just want to have that kind of moment. And I want to do the same thing with our regulatory proposals so that if someone is under the impression that, we're going off track, that we can have that conversation. I think when that thought has come up, okay, along the way, there have been questions raised at what sort of I experienced as unexpected moments about whether something was in scope or not. So what I'm trying to do is trying to create an actual space for that conversation so that we can have it calmly and knowing that this is really what we're doing right now. We're having that conversation. And I think, it'll be more fruitful to have the conversation in that dedicated context. So I'm both reviewing and giving an opportunity to kind of object if somebody wants to object. Does that seem reasonable?
Yep.
Anybody feel like we're wasting our time or like we should do this faster? Okay. All right. So I might come back with something on 3 in some other context. I'm not going to bother with it now. It's not that. It's just a tweak. It's not a big deal. To determine existing Orleans dog regulations that may need to be changed, I think is obviously in our charge. To identify dog regulations for access to conservation and town-owned land in Orleans. Ed, I think you kind of did that already.
Yeah.
To strengthen compliance with Orleans dog regulations, to strengthen enforcement of Orleans dog regulations.
In meeting with the chief of police, we got some good scoping information there about what's easy to enforce and what's not. So
Right.
that was a very illuminating meeting.
Yeah.
That was the meeting before the last one.
Right. And I think we have more to talk about on that, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, to ensure select board decisions about dog-related matters are made in responsive public forums accessible to all. So we've done a lot of work on that. There's a proposal on that, and Nate and we're gonna tweak it and come back to the committee with it. To identify new lands in Orleans that may be open for dog access. I think that's really important. And I don't think we've done anything with it, but I think that's even in our charge explicitly. To increase knowledge about dog behavior and owner responsibility. To propose training opportunities intended to help dog owners gain necessary and appropriate control of their dogs. We talked a little bit about this in the context of doing things with the police department, but also this might be some stuff that ODOG can help with. I don't know. To advance inventive signage informing dog owners and other members of the community of their rights and responsibilities when using conservation and town-owned lands in Orleans. To promote safe and responsible use of conservation and town-owned lands for dog walking in Orleans. And to prepare a report that will assist the select board in meeting their responsibility for continuing human and animal compatibility in Orleans. So that's, yes,
Point of information.
please.
It's a great opportunity here because Orleans has engaged the Cape Cod Commission in a wayfinding study which means that think of going to a hospital or college campus. And so if your committee can have recommendations I think it's the planning board's charge. And I don't know yet when the Cape Cod Commission is reporting, but I think it's end of September. You want to make sure that if you need any signs or you want to go to a logo or you want to be engaged in steering people to areas where dogs are allowed to be walked, you get that information embedded into our general wayfinding system. That's all.
Okay. Can I ask you more about that offline? Yeah, okay. All right. So those are the charge items. And then if you look at the document called work plan proposal, and I want to emphasize the proposal aspect of it. I just threw this together. You may be able to do much better than me on, one or many aspects of it. I don't know. I just was trying to put something together. Does everybody have it? The work plan proposal? Okay, so it says, at the top, it says charge tasks and parking lot items allocated to objectives with potential additional objectives indicated and explained in red, parking lot items in blue, and specific regulatory proposals in greens, version 2, May 17th. I'm wondering if maybe we should just take a few minutes to, do you want to read this on your own? Do you want me to read it out loud? What works better for you?
Carl, could you state what we're trying to accomplish right now?
Yeah, we're trying to come up with a work plan for our movement forward. We're basically.
What I recall is that we'd gone through the work plan and it was generally agreed on, and we were in the process of plugging and chugging with respect to the dog regulations. And that was, we had some very good cadence in our meetings leading up to our last, and that is reflected in the notes that we have on the regulations themselves, the dog regulation summary. And so in some ways, I think the work plan is vague and hazy in our minds. I'm certain if that's true for me, but I remember the momentum that we had with respect to the difficult issues of the regulations, and that was very encouraging. So my question is, it doesn't really make, it doesn't necessarily make sense for us to start jumping into the regulations because we've all missed a few beats of our lives since then, and we have to put them back together. So if I could suggest, the objectives, I think we should go put them back into our heads. But I don't suspect that there's going to be any glaring change because we all sat around the table and agreed that this is what we want to do, this is how we're going to do it, and we actually started on that process, specifically with the regulations.
Yeah, so let's really get into that a little bit because I think we might have two different perspectives on. I wouldn't explain what happened exactly the same way as you are, although I do understand what you're saying. But I think it's important to kind of define these two versions of kind of explanations of our history and what we've done. My understanding of why we went into those regulations as deeply as we did at the time, the way I experienced it, I was actually following a suggestion that I remember you making that we should kind of try to see if there were any no-brainers, so to speak, in all the regulatory possibilities that there were. Because we were trying to, if there were some, we were going to try to get them through the strainer, and we were going to try to get them to the select board by the end of February.
With one of the objectives being that we were establishing a cadence of getting things done and how to make decisions in the face of diversity. And we did that.
Okay. I'll say that I hear that that's what it was for you, and I'm not going to argue with you about it, but that wasn't forefront in my mind at the time. Okay, just just my experience was not. I wouldn't express it that way, and I want to hear from other people here too, and I don't want to get into who's right or who's wrong or anything like that, but my concern about really trying to just get to a resolution on the thorniest and most complicated of the regulatory proposals up front is that they're going to moot a lot of questions that I think are in these other objectives and that would help inform us as to what, all of our possibilities are. And I'll give you a really important example of that. If it turns out that there's another really good place in town that would be suitable for off-leash dog activity, or if it turns out that there's no other place in town, doesn't that have an impact on how we view Kent's Point? Like, if we shut off, if we kind of create a structure that has the effect of shutting Kent's Point off from any kind of off-leash activity, and it turns out that there's no other place in town to do that, then what we've done is made it impossible to have dogs off leash in Orleans legally.
You're not gonna, don't worry, you won't be able to do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm really confused about a lot of things right now, just as an outside person listening to this.
Yep.
Can somebody please restate? I know the charges, I've read all your notes, gone through your packet. At this point, past your interim reports, what do you want to be able to give the Board of Selectmen? Because right now our leash laws run throughout town. It doesn't matter where you are. They're like our noise ordinances, right?
Yeah.
Are you designing, where other than picking up poop, which I've heard that you're dealing with, where is the regulation broken that you're fixing it?
Well, there's a perception of broken. There's a perception of broken at Kent's Point for two reasons. One being the dog attack in 2018.
Okay,
And the other related reason being that there are people in town who don't feel comfortable going to Kent's Point and walking their dogs.
is there a problem anywhere else in town at this point perceived by this committee?
Not me. Anybody else think there's a problem anywhere else?
Well, I don't know, unless.
Wildflower.
Wildflower, yeah, maybe there.
And is it the same problem, just in a different location?
Well, there are different problems in each property. At Kent's Point, we have overuse. We have unaware visitors. We have over exuberant dog owners who think that sort of running in a pack is okay and don't necessarily pay attention to the visitors. At Wildflower, there's a mishmash of regulations. And I think the perception is that, some people love Kent's Point. Some people are afraid to go to Kent's Point. Wildflower is accessible, at specific times. The regulations there have been loosened up, and it's sort of a positive thing. But if you step back from both Kent's Point and, Wildflower, the underlying issue in these is that dog owners' control of their animal ultimately needs to be, immediate and effective if they're on a leash or not. And that needs to be coupled with what I'd call just good manners in meeting people with small children or other dogs. And so one of the things that I think that the current regulations don't do, and this is what Bob and I worked on, is it sets up the definition of control, but it doesn't define how your dog should behave. And I think that sort of positive approach is something that we'll come back and link to it more efficiently. But that's an idea of some lateral thinking about how to solve what's effectively what's seen as a right of usage by certain types of dog owners, or right of certain types of behavior. So is that helpful, Carl? I'm not sure.
Yeah, but I totally disagree with you. And I think that has to be, we have to really delineate this disagreement in a friendly way so that
So let's
we
pop it up a
understand.
notch.
Huh?
So let's pop it up a notch then.
Well, let me
So
explain
as
what
we're going-
let me explain why I disagree. Because I think you're jumping to there are different ways to approach this. And when you say that the problem is that dogs need to be more immediately controlled, in my judgment, you're adopting a solution. You're not defining the problem. This problem is that people are uncomfortable. One way you could solve that is to have hours, just like you do at Wildflower. And so you would have, dog off-leash hours. And if people were uncomfortable with off-leash dogs, they could just not go during those hours. That solves the problem of people being uncomfortable at Kent's Point. So this is where I disagree with you, is that you've taken the solution that Meph and Kevin told us they wanted. They said, they didn't put it in the charge. The charge doesn't say define control, but Kevin and Meph, when we were being formed, said, oh, and by the way, we really need a definition of control. Give us an enforceable definition of control. That's a solution. And so when you just adopt that solution and then start crafting it, start wordsmithing it, in my judgment, you've jumped, way ahead of the game to the end.
What was the chief of police's primary complaint with the current ordinance?
Yeah, but that's the chief of police has
It's
also told. Right, but the chief of police has also privately told me the other side of the regulatory equation. So and he's not on the committee. In other words, if we're just going to do what a couple of people in town want done, they don't need us. They can just say, dog's got to be under voice control. He's got to come back immediately. That means 3 seconds or less. Let him go to town meeting and let him do that. If our process, as far as I'm concerned, is not to be a front for Kevin and Meph and the chief of police.
All right, can I, just as an
Yes.
outside observer, I'm ex
Sure.
officio, I have no vote.
Yeah.
But I'm looking at, you've got a really tough problem. And my experience of, I think we all agree that dogs that jump up on people that don't want to be approached by dogs that are off leash and may be aggressive with other dogs off leash, people leaving poop bags everywhere. Our problem is always going to be define and enforce, and then staff enforcement, right? So a clean solution, look, you license drivers, right? But that doesn't mean they're polite and they don't have accidents. So I'm just looking at this from a holistic point of view. In terms of what you design, do we have the willingness, and you've had the conversations with the chief of police. I don't know who else is Nate involved with enforcement. Who are the
Yep.
governing agencies for control? If you set up something that people can call the police now, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't prevent people from getting knocked over. or anybody hurt or attacked, right? If they're uncomfortable around dogs. You're not-
Well,
some-
if you make people, if you define control in this kind of, very precise and very definite and global way, where it applies, by the way, to Yorkies and all that, which is part of my problem with the whole thing. As a small dog owner, my dog is never going to bother anybody. So, I'm not eager to just assume that leashing my dog solves any problem.
Right.
Okay. But I lost my train of thought.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Could I answer Ms. Reed's question that she put
Sure.
before us?
Yeah.
When you look carefully at the charge, there are 5 tasks. But the tasks are all related to process. They're not related to the identification on the part of the select board of problems that they want us to recommend on. So they use words like review, identify, research. There is nothing in the charge that says that we should have a final report, unfortunately. So in answering to your question, I'm interested in making sure that we state how we're going to proceed from this point on. And what is happening in our meeting right now, and this happened often, is that as we try to determine how we're going to proceed, in my mind, to prepare a final report for the select board consideration, we start getting into details associated with the issues that are being addressed. So we never really come up with a clear plan on how we're going to proceed in terms of producing a final report. So one thing that I would like to ask you as a liaison to the board, would you please ask the board to tell us when they want our final report?
I can actually tell you, Carl, I don't know that you'll want to know this, but there's part of the town administrator told me directly that because you had delivered your report, he thought your committee was done. Because there's no end date in the charge either.
That's right.
And so I think the idea was we had a dramatic event that scarred people literally and figuratively with the dog attack. And we have had enough complaints about, certainly at Kent's Point. But those of us who have lived in town a long time know this isn't the first time this has happened, and it's a constant issue. And I think we were looking at this committee as a brain trust for recommendations that went beyond and could improve our perception. So I don't know that there is a deadline. I don't think there is one now legally because there's no end date on your charge. So it's when you deliver your report, Bob, if that's what you wanted to know.
When would the select board like to have the report?
We would have liked to have it in February of 20. I mean, it's past due. From the select board's point of view, I'm pretty sure they would say it's past due.
Given the fact that it's past due, what would be the new date that you would like to receive it?
But again, I don't know because I haven't pulled the select board on that. What I would say is that your wisdom, because you've spent a lot more time with this material at a much deeper level than probably anybody on the select board, your time in it can articulate and advise the select board about what you're struggling with. And I would compliment the work you've already done. As I read through it, there are lots of things that have to do less with regulations and a lot more with good civic behavior and marketing. Tell the story of what's the behavior dog owners are expected to have in Orleans. That's a marketing issue to me. That's not an enforcement issue. That's like saying we pick up trash on the street. We don't throw trash down. You can do a whole education the way the Pond Coalition talked about a Cape Cod lawn.
Let me try to ask my question in a different way. Does the select board want a final report from
Yes.
our task
Yes.
force?
Yes.
When would you like to have it?
Again, the select board has not discussed the standing of your committee officially. I'm your liaison. I cannot give you a decision that the select board hasn't made.
Could you ask them for us then?
Yeah, of course. Carl can actually, as your chair, Carl can send a letter that says, when would you like your,
Okay,
and copy me. That would be the formal way to do it, to Kevin and to John Kelly.
okay, but we're again,
One more thing, Carl, before you come on. If we know when we're going to finish our report, I'm particularly concerned about us figuring out a way to write the report. Meaning, how do we take advantage of the creative intelligence of our group and put a report together and present it to the board? For me, that's the plan. I feel that we've done sufficient research. We've inquired to a lot of issues. We have some agreements, we have some conclusions that we still are searching for, but it's time to write the report and get going on it. For us to continue to do additional research borders on the possibility that we're doing is ignoring our responsibility of providing recommendations to the board.
So
okay, I need to jump in.
please,
Okay, so we have a bunch of objectives, okay? And the large majority of those objectives we have done absolutely nothing on. So I need to understand what the relationship is between our objectives and our report. Because the way what seems natural to me, and apparently does not seem natural to everyone, but so that's okay. But what seems natural to me is that if you commit to some objectives and if you decide, yes, this is what we're going to do, then you complete an objective. And when you have completed it, you write up what your resolution was. And as you complete objectives, you write about them. And eventually, when you have completed all your objectives or have jettisoned objectives that you decide that are too complicated, or you don't want to do them, or you are going to just talk about what you've discussed about them and not bother to include a resolution, that's your report. So if somebody's saying, we just pick a date and then we have 16 objectives or however many it is, and we start writing a report when we have talked about 4 of those objectives, I can't wrap my brain around that. I just don't. I'm not trying to be
I think there's a difference,
difficult.
Carl.
I just don't understand it.
I agree. I don't understand it either, because the objectives were talked about as a vehicle for us to sort of scope our conversations. I don't think there was ever any sort of discussion about delivering a final report through the lens of our objectives. I thought that the idea was to generate a final report that shows what concrete actions or recommendations that we had to do to provide to the town, that the objectives helped scope our discussions. So I honestly, if I were someone reading a report, I would be very interested in understanding the context for each of the items that was being presented, sort of what's the problem, and the solution or solutions if such a thing is warranted, so that I can understand, this is the problem, here's the recommendations that this August group has decided to make. So if we never mentioned anything about our objectives in that report, I would actually, as a reader, would actually be sort of happy about, because I'm looking for material changes and sort of a context for each of those material changes. But that's my opinion.
One more thing on that. It's possible, it seems to me, that as we prepare the final report for the select board, we remember that we are not a decision-making group, we're a recommending group.
okay.
And it may be that some of the objectives we will not get to. And in fact, some of them might be more appropriate for the select board to pursue than our task force.
Or ODOG.
And that we recommend that the select board pursue that objective in ways that they consider to be appropriate for the betterment of our town.
Can I
So,
ask a process question?
pardon me?
Can I ask a process question about that, on that
Please,
subject? If
please.
your group has considered multiple objections, I think Bob is right about that. The select board is gonna read your report and weigh and deliberate it. But if there are multiple possibilities, your group can say, we leave it, here are the things we discussed.
Exactly.
Here are the pros and cons of them, and we were divided, or we didn't conclude. You don't have to reach agreement to have a product.
Yeah, I'm totally keen on that, but if we haven't even talked about it, which is what the status of most of our objectives is, then it's difficult for me to understand. That's why I started by asking, do we want these objectives or not? I don't understand how we say, yes, this objective should be here, but we're going to write a report without ever having talked about the objective.
So
I
Carl,
don't-
one of
I
the
just
ways
don't get it.
one of the ways that charter review works, when you have a lot of material, is
Mhm.
you can divide up those objectives. People take a look at them, go off, give each other written comment on it. If you're not going to have that many more meetings, and synthesize your answers. Do your work plan around those objectives you haven't covered yet.
But that's what I'm trying to do
Okay.
today. But to me, as I'm doing the best I can, okay? I'm not trying to be thick, but I can't reconcile, making an attempt to get through the objectives, allocate research to people, et cetera, and starting to write a report when we have 10 objectives that nothing has been done on, and when they might inform some of the decisions that we make about some of the things that we have talked about a lot.
Right.
1 second, Dave. The only reason, in my judgment, that we talked about the regulatory things as deeply as we did is because we were trying to strain for no-brainers. We were not having a conversation in the context of knowing everything else, such as, are there suitable places elsewhere in Orleans to have off-leash running? If we don't know that's a crucial thing we don't know in our decisions that affect Kent. So I don't know, Dave.
So I apologize because we're all doing this kind of mental catching up here.
Yeah.
But I think and this is what I asked earlier, is, this document that has the charge tasks that seem to have the same items that you have on the interim report. I'm just trying to make a checklist out of it. So for instance, tell me if this is what we'd like to accomplish. So the first item it's in red. It says, to identify benefits of dog walking, both leashed and off leash. So for instance, from me, if you're asking me if I were to check these off and tell me, Dave, you need a report done in 30 days. I'm just making this up as an approach. Personally, I'd go, I don't think I need to identify benefits of walking dogs leashed or on leash. To me, it's not important. People walk their dogs and it's self-evident. I'm just giving an example. I'm not poo-pooing the fact that you wrote it here. I'm just saying, would that then be the approach as a committee? We go through and we go, yes, no, no, yes,
Yeah.
yes, no, or further research. The second one, reach out to renters on the impact of dog restrictions. Nice idea, but again, I'd say I don't have bandwidth for that. And I think our core issues would actually help inform that. And maybe, as Andrea said, at some point in the future, it might become part of a marketing / community outreach / update to people.
Well, can I interrupt you right there just to
Yeah,
make sure that
yeah.
we're
I'm just giving you
understanding?
an illustration
Yeah.
of how I'd approach it.
I know. I just want to make sure that we both understand that one the same way. To me, the reason that's in there is, do we want to consider, potential economic impacts? It goes back to the thing of Orleans being identified as a dog-friendly town. Some of the people on the ODOG site have said, who are out of town have said, if Orleans gets really restrictive and I can't take my dog anywhere in Orleans, I'm not going to come to Orleans, on vacation.
Good point. And I'm going to jump in.
That's what I was relating to.
Yeah. And so I could rewrite it slightly to just simply say, I'd make it, again, me personally, just as an illustration, I would say, be happy to include that as a note to the report that we believe, and we get consensus or not, that the fact that we're a dog-friendly town is a net benefit. And leave it, because versus people who would not come to town because there's dogs here, I'd be incredulous, Every town has dogs. So I'd say,
right.
yeah, it's a good point. You can make it as one of your points. Data on bird impact, data on poop impact, those are really good questions, and I don't have a clue. It might be things that we simply say, we don't really know right now, and maybe that's something Nate is going to update us on. And then, as you were saying earlier, Carl, what does that even mean? If you have data on it, is first identify, is it a problem? If it's a problem, what kind of a problem? And what do you actually end up doing about it? And I don't know,
Okay, can I just quickly jump in and tell you that one of the things you do about it is that you communicate it to people in your educational campaign.
Mhm.
In other words, if it turns out that, there's data that persuasively says that dog poop is going to do this and that to the water, and if there's data that says, so many migratory birds are going to die, that when you, one scenario was that in order to use Kent's Point and Wildflower, you would have to watch a video or get a training scenario, kind of like with the Outer Beach. Okay, so if we gathered this information would go into that, and it would help to persuade people who might not think that these things are problems, that they need to be more careful about, they can't just let their dog go and turn around and start talking to their friend, because there are these collateral impacts that are important. That's
Right.
just why that's there.
Yeah. I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. Frankly, those two things could be some of the top 3 or 4 thorniest issues that we would grapple with. And again, but it may be that if we have to get a report out in a shorter time period, that we may say we would appreciate additional info, or if it exists. But that, for instance, we may say, here's some recommendations. So better signage, your video, a couple of little mini checklists, maybe periodic volunteers standing there and introducing, greeting people as they show up and say, hey, there's a new way we're doing this. I'm just making this up,
That was a good one. See, I'm writing that down.
And it may or may not, for instance, I think that, I had some idea with the signage. It'll come back to me later, but we could have better signage is much more direct and really tells people
Absolutely.
how to do it. And that signage could be at every trail. Once you decide, hey, we like this signage. So again, for a report, it might say we recommend better signage to achieve the following. We may not design the sign, but
So in my understanding, that means we have to have a meeting where one of the things on the agenda is signage. And once we have talked about signage, at that point, when we have come to some kind of conclusions and have left some things hanging because they're too complicated, somebody volunteers to write that up. And we now have our paragraph on signage that goes into the overall report. That's,
Okay.
to me, how we proceed. I just don't get any other way of doing it. I'm not trying to be difficult. I can't imagine how else it would go. So I need
so is
somebody
your question, is this a
help
good
me-
checklist for us to use? And is there anybody who wants to delete anything or
Yeah.
add anything?
Yeah.
So I'll recommend that we,
Oh, wait a minute, David, before we,
Yep.
can we reach closure on the fact that the objectives were for the purpose of giving us some direction at a time in which we were seeking direction?
Mhm.
The objectives were not intended for the purpose of saying that the report has to include every objective.
Mhm.
In fact, there may be other groups that are more prepared and have the resources and talents to accomplish some of those objectives. They seem to be very worthwhile in understanding dog and human compatibility in our town now and in the future. So in our report, we could very well address those an objective that someone else could do through a recommendation that someone pursue that or consider pursuing that objective. I don't want to lock us into thinking that we have to have every objective in our report. That wasn't the purpose of the objectives when we originally derived them.
And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that either, which is why I went through the process of asking, are there objectives that we want to jettison? You can look at it in a different way and say, are there objectives
Maybe-
that we just want to allude to, or that we want to, contract out to some other group? I'm not saying,
Let's first understand that we don't hold ourselves to some kind of a strategy of saying that all objectives need to be included in the report.
I'm
If we can
agreeing with
agree to
you.
that, we can then move on and start saying, okay, what do we want to include? Because the argument that was presented previously was suggesting that all these objectives have to be dealt with in order for us to write a report. I think we could start writing a report right away. I don't think we have to go through and accomplish each of those objectives before we start writing a report. And I think that's where David was going. I didn't mean to interrupt you, David, but I did
Yeah.
want to get across the idea of what the purpose of those objectives were. It wasn't to say that the report should have every objective that we have listed there included in the report.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I think there are a lot of good ideas. So for instance, I was going to suggest to that end, so it says to, I said originally, to identify benefits of dog walking, both leash and off leash. Personally, I would say that let's not include that in a report right now. I don't know what I would say.
Great.
If we want to go through a checklist for sort of, in and out, and then we can, through that process, there may be things we think are important, like you say, but I think Carl's saying the same thing. We don't really have an answer, but we can say we don't really have an answer, but at least it's there because we think it's important. So I think dog poop is important. I got some ideas. We could write it up and see what people think about it at a next meeting, for instance, and we could all do that process.
Yeah, but I think we need to have a conversation about whether, it's worth talking about the benefits of dog walking. And I think
Yeah.
it's possible that somebody, what's the matter?
I'm just listening to this conversation, and it seems very much like we're back in December and we're trying to figure out what we're doing. And we're going back. This is natural. I think it's part of the natural progress of being away from something and coming back to it. But if I were to ask you all a question, it would be simply, at what point in time were we doing our most effective work? And I venture to say that it was probably in our last few meetings where we were actually going through and reviewing the regulations and making suggestions about them. It was very clear, like looking for the fish in the barrel. We found some of those. It gave the group confidence that, we were able to make progress. We were reviewing items that were of importance for the town and what changes to regulations we would make. And that put us all in a position where we were focused on producing results as opposed to discussing how the results should be organized. And I think that, I'm just throwing it out there, maybe what we should do is, go back to the last known state where we were actively making progress, and then start to interleave some of these discussions into that process. Because talking about them here now, we're all going to walk away from this meeting scratching our heads about what we actually accomplished and what we're going to do. And, are we going to have the objective scope of the report? That's an outstanding question. But for our next meeting and our next agenda item, what's the most important thing that we need to do? And how do we get back on track? And that's my question to the group. How do we get back on track to where we were? It felt to me personally like we were making good progress.
For my part, I think this is a pretty good outline. These 3.5, 4 pages.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to go through it and knock some off, and then like I think Carl's basically saying this. you know, let's look at each one of these, decide if it's something we want to act on or not act on. Or to whatever degree, you know, even it's just to delete it, or it's to mention it, or to state that we believe it's important, but we don't know what we want to do about it. I mean, I think the
Are the
thorny
are the
ones, the
objectives to
thorny
be in
ones
the
are,
final
you know,
report?
that you've got the town, and again, part of the, and I think we've all struggled with this since day one, because I've never gotten an explicit, straight answer from the Board of Selectmen as to what's the real issue. Because it just sort of, they just, you know, we had issues and they just gave us this big thing, and it was far bigger than I thought it should be. But I would think that the leash law is one, and I guess some of you have had questions there. It's very thorny, and it's almost a it's almost an in or out proposition, and we may want to focus on what our response to that is. So for instance, we may say, you know what, on balance, we've decided that the current regulations are sufficient. Just as one way we could do it. And yes, there's a downside to it, but as Andrea said, people get licenses, but they still speed. It doesn't, you know, justifying that, it's just a fact. And the point of it, in the IRS audits, they only audit some people because it's a mechanism to try to keep people's behavior within reasonable bounds. I don't care what regulation you come up with, it's never going to be perfect. But we may make it worse by saying everybody's got to be on a leash, and we've said, well, what about the the consequences that we didn't really want to have happen? Andrew, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. And Carl, because you included, if you go to the thing that Carl included about the current regulations, animal control regulations, I would assume that part of your report might have any recommendations of things that should be said or added or edited in the current regulations, as well as complementary types of solutions you've come up with. Are you going to?
We were actually in a process of going through that, where we were walking through suggestions that people had made. And so that particular piece of collateral is probably the strongest thing that the task force has produced today, because everybody was galvanized around figuring out how to make, meaningful changes, the fish in a barrel approach. And, we were starting to look at some of the more difficult extra items like, definition of control, or, what control should be stated. So I think it makes sense to go back to where there was momentum and to start wrapping your heads around that, and let the objectives be things that we bring in as sort of like guiding principles. But I don't see the need to go through the objectives, honestly, because there's not enough context in this discussion to sort of determine whether or not we want them. Our job is to produce recommendations, right? So recommendations based on data, statistics, research, talking to other members of the select board, chief of police, people in the town. But I tend to be very, tactical about these sort of things strategically. I might be missing something, but the reason that we arrived at going over the regulations and providing those changes to them was that it was a moment for us to actually galvanize as a group and start making positive forward progress. And we had been lacking that up until, I'm going to say, what, February maybe? So the last part of February and March, basically, well, maybe it was January, maybe it's February and March that we actually started to, have the group be enthusiastic about the discussion and the outcome after a vote. And we need to replicate that. Bring it back.
Okay, what are you proposing? Because I'm just trying to be tangible about it. I'm not against what you're saying. I'm just saying we have a list here. Do we want to use this list as Carl's suggesting?
I don't know. I think that's an option. Honestly, I would propose that we go back to looking at the regulations, reviewing what we've done so far, and seeing if we can't pick up on that, because that's probably one of the most important things we're going to provide to the select board. So
that would be to determine existing Orleans dog regulations that may need to be changed. That topic, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one item on the list. So I don't, I think we agree. Then is that tonight or is that another night?
No, that's not tonight.
Another night.
Right, okay.
I'm just looking, I'm just bringing up the charge again here just to look at it. Well, yeah, another one that we have to do. Well, I don't know, never mind.
Can I just refresh your charge for you? Just because the selectmen or John Kelly created the charge in that way, I think you do have some authority at this point to take the charge and respond to it based on what you've learned and prioritize based on how you feel as a group. And I think those will be the most compelling and valuable points that you can give to us at the select board. So, you know, what you
Well
feel
stated.
strongest about.
Well stated.
Say that again so I can capture it.
I think that I'm looking at the charge and I'm looking at all the work you've done. And I think what will be compelling to the select board to hear is the things that you, again, those charges are made up in a vacuum. They're kind of intellectual and they're, you know, but you've now lived with the material. It's like you've done this big science experiment. And what you've learned, and I respect the depth with which both Carl is, because of his background and how he thinks about things, he's trying to make sure that in no stone unturned, you haven't cut your own nose off in terms of making a recommendation. I get that. I think that's a valuable exercise. But I also understand that some of these tasks were unfair to put on this group, is what I'm kind of looking at. Because they involve things that you have no way of knowing either how to deal with it or the capacity to enforce it. You know, if we're going to hire a canine animal control person, or that's not your charge. I think that's the select board's charge, to figure out how to get your recommendations done. So I would beg of you that your report reflects what you feel strongly about and what you see as a positive step. If a regulation needs to be augmented or thrown out, or if there are other tools that we haven't thought of as a community and that you're already testing, as Carl said, like timing, so that somewhere, anybody in town who doesn't want to deal with dogs can walk safely somewhere. And anybody who wants to walk a dog can walk their dog safely somewhere. That's a whole different solution. But I think
Yeah.
if you come to a consensus, and
Well,
Carl, let me just finish one thing.
yeah,
In
okay.
your report, if you also say, we have not finished our work here, some of us would be interested in completing our thoughts, but we understand that at some point we're coming up to a year, and here are our thoughts right now. That the report doesn't necessarily mean that the group ends, but the report is a snapshot of the work you've done. If that makes sense?
May I ask
Yeah.
a clarifying question, Andrea? So the interim report that we sent out, you previously stated that it was perceived to be the report,
Yeah,
and that's not the case. So right now, the perception of the selectmen is that they don't know, or select board, excuse me, doesn't know what's going on.
Correct.
And so it behooves us to produce something in short order to establish what we've completed, what we're struggling on, whatever.
not necessarily, because now you have a liaison, you're started to reconvening. I would advocate, if you as a group say, we're just beginning to get a handle on this, we need a couple more months, as long as I can appraise the select board of your status, self-imposed status, I think we make a case that you complete your work in the fashion you deem fit. The select board has not arbitrarily put a deadline on this report yet. If I go back and report and say they would like a deadline, I hope we'll be able to provide you one. But
Well,
I think it is a conversation.
okay, so I just want to go on record that speaking for myself as a member of the committee and nothing more, I don't welcome a deadline. What I'm concerned about is that, you know, we're gonna get railroaded here internally into taking the simplest solutions and writing them up as quickly as possible, and wrapping it up in a way that maybe satisfies certain pressures inside town government, maybe gives people in town government what they want, but does not reflect an honest effort to really grapple with what is a multidimensional problem in a serious way. When Meth first talked to me about this, the very first time we talked, he said, there are towns that have this much, you know, that have this much in dog regulations, and we've got 2 pages, and maybe it's time somebody put some thought into it. We've met 12 times. We've wasted untold amounts of time on things that were not productive in terms of actually getting us towards a solution. And now again, it's going to be, let's get a deadline, let's hurry up, let's get this done. I don't see how that's going to end up being anything more than giving them a definition of control that they asked for, and something that says dog park bad, and the end. I don't feel like this is taking us toward, this is all about, let's keep it simple. Let's not look at how difficult this might be. That's how it lands with me as an individual. I'm not saying this is a chair. I'm just saying this as a member of the board. I don't know. That's how it lands with me. It's just avoiding the issues rather than grappling with them. My 2 cents. Yeah.
Carl, I appreciate your concern because I share some of that, you know, I to a degree. But what I'm grappling with here is, let's then identify what are the sticky points, you know? I mean, I talk about the leash and off leash. That's the benefits of dog wearing. I don't think that's an issue we should deal with. You know, that's a choice. But if a dog is to be leashed or not to be leashed, that's a thorny issue. And I think we should decide, okay, that's one toughie. What else is tough? Is it really an issue at Kent's Point? I don't know if we have the ability to even open up the whole issue at Kent's Point again. I don't recall other people that much better than I do. But if there isn't, then maybe we leave it, we decide, and saying that would be part of the process, to leave it alone and just try to enhance the dog poop control issues, for instance. You know, better signage, some outreach. But let's identify whether or not that is a core issue, because the things that aren't core, then you don't really care too much about, right? Because if they're not that material. So what are the material things? Wildflower, to me, that's the reason I got involved. I thought that was really material. That was a personal thing that I had very strong opinions about. And should we grapple with that? And maybe that's one of the 3 or 4 top things. And again, I'm not trying to shovel it all by.
No.
But
Well,
just to go through that process to identify those.
I'm with you. I'm with you, and that's what I was trying to do, Dave. And
Right.
you know, as often happens in this committee, there's such a difference of understanding of what this is and how we should do it, that there's, you know, we're fractured along the same kind of impasse that we were fractured along in earlier. So I'm going to suggest even yet another
I don't agree.
possibility. Well, let me just finish my sentence. That's how I experience it. Okay, speaking for myself, that's what I'm experiencing. That's how I'm perceiving it. Here's another possibility. Maybe everybody in the committee just writes their own report. And then we turn in 5 reports. Everybody gets a chance to say what they have to say. Nobody has to bother to try to agree with each other or try to accommodate mental processes that there seems to be a very high degree of discomfort with. I mean, at this point, it would, speaking for myself, it would be easier for me to sit down for a week and just write down everything that I think about this and just turn it in. Let you guys all do the same and let them figure it out. It might be, I'm being serious.
Could Ed speak to what he disagreed with?
Absolutely. Yeah, please.
I mean, that's a possibility. It's sort of a non-starter in that we're just demonstrating our dysfunction or our inability to reach a compromise, which is, I think that's part of the process. But I want to go back. I think that the group has made very good progress when we've been able to galvanize around something, discuss it, and vote on it. And that is again, going back to the work on the dog regulations that happened in the last month before our break, was an opportunity where everybody felt like they were contributing and making forward progress. There was good debate, there was good progress, and honestly, I think if you have a success, you want to follow up on that as much as you possibly can, because success breeds success. There might be sticky points along the way, but it gets us back on track to being productive as opposed to debating how many angels dance on the head of a pin. And that's where we are.
And that's one way to look at it. And the other way that we could look at it is that, okay, some people in the group want to do it one way and some people want to do it another way. And you're saying, let's do it your way. I mean, I'm just being honest.
Saying that there are a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what to do with this. I'm at a loss.
Well, let me refresh your memory.
So I remember February and March very, very clearly. I know exactly what we were working on. I know that we also have different perceptions of exactly what was going on there.
But did we resolve issues? Did we vote on things and move them forward?
Not as far as not as far as the definition of control is concerned, because
let's go. Well, no, let's go back one step farther. As we started to go through things like the law of restraints, unanimous approval for that, and so on and so forth. And so we made good progress on many sort of beneficial to dog and owner, decisions. And that momentum propelled us to a position where we could talk on restraints. It's my recollection that Bob and I did present that and we voted on it. I don't see the results of that vote, and I won't say what it was until we actually have the meeting notes, but we did vote on it and it passed.
No,
that's
absolutely not. That absolutely did not happen. I absolutely know that it did not happen. So we have to resolve that. But this is part of the problem, is that we're living in just completely different realities. And that's why, as I said to Andrea when I was talking to her about what I wanted to do this time, was to establish a common reality and a common narrative. And you have a narrative in which you pass something. I have a narrative in which you propose something, which was one of two ways of approaching a problem, and got feedback on it. And then we're going to take it away and bring it back. And then that never happened. So those are very different stories.
Can I ask you guys something as your liaison? Can you finish your work?
I don't think we can. I mean, at this point,
we've been here an hour and a half, and I haven't heard an agenda move forward.
Yeah, nothing's happening.
I'm not sure that I don't know, because you've taken several different tacks about, should we write a report on a timeline? Should we have a work plan? Can you finish your work together as a group?
No, I don't think we can. I'd just rather write down what I think and give it to the select board and let these guys do what they want to do. And we'll all get out of this a lot faster, and each have a chance to be integral in terms of doing what we truly believe is right.
Can I ask Carl, who's missing from the committee tonight?
Jessica Brown and Jennifer Seabuth and Paul Pekaski.
I think it's a very hard thing for you to chair a group when you also have strong opinions, because the chair is supposed to be the person who builds consensus. And I'm hearing that tug of war for you. I'm watching it. So I, just as somebody who's served on a lot of committees, I have concerns watching you guys that I don't know how you're going to resolve these issues.
Yeah, I don't think we can do it in integrity. In other words, somebody's going to have to capitulate and give away what they honestly believe in order for us to be able to move forward, because we honestly believe in different ways of proceeding, and we even honestly believe in different histories, in different facts of what happened. And I could prove that I'm right about it, but it's like I don't want to, because like then I win, he loses. We're so divergent, and however it happened, I don't know. I don't even care at this point.
But Carl, I guess what I'm saying is, right now, given your task, go back to what Dave was trying to do. Right now, even if there are multiple viewpoints about how to move forward, you can present that in the report and saying, here are what we've reviewed. We leave the choice up to you guys.
But
You understand?
Bob doesn't want to do that. I don't want to speak for you, Bob, but
Don't
speak
for me. Please, Carl, don't speak for me.
Right. I'm going to speak to how I hear you.
Carl,
Okay.
I'll speak for myself.
I know that. I got
Okay,
it.
So
So
what do you want to say, Carl?
Do you see what I mean?
No,
All I'm saying is,
Carl,
that
excuse me. Carl, you were going to say something. Please proceed.
I don't even remember at this point, except, the general theme was that I don't see a meshing here. I don't see a common ground. I just see, you said, I don't think there's a consensus on the committee. Let me put it that way, that what you just described of going through objectives and making some kind of decision, comment, whatever about them is an acceptable way to proceed. So I'm not hearing, I don't know where to go from here. I don't see a path.
Excuse me, I didn't say that. What I said was the objectives were created to give us some sense of commonality and direction. They were not created for saying that the report has to include every objective that we think is important for human and dog compatibility in our town. So I think that's not agreeing or disagreeing. It's stating what they were intended for.
can I ask Dave a question?
Sure.
Dave, when you said that's why I got involved, what did compel you to get involved?
The short story is that the board, the BOS had very quickly made a vote to sort of ban use of wildflower.
Right.
And there was a reaction to that and pushback from quite a few people.
Yes.
I was one of them. And so then through that process, they said, okay, well, they changed it back and allowed some partial access, morning and afternoon, and during summer season. And then came up with this charge, which to me seemed huge. It's just like looking at everything. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't even anticipating something like that. So again, back to this, Liz, I'm not saying I disagree or agree with Ed at all. I think, Ed, are you saying that we've got, so for instance, to determine existing Orleans dog regulations that may need to be changed and propose potential appropriate amendments. Are you just saying we've done that? And so that if that's the case, can we just distribute it and have it at the next meeting to, get us back up to speed again?
Yeah, I'd like to get the notes from that last meeting, because I do remember Bob and I both presented it, and then we asked people to vote on it, and I'd like to see what the meeting notes show about that vote. So
Would you look
think
at the
that's
meeting?
logical.
I sent you the links of the actual meeting that you can watch too, you know, which is
I have not watched
truer
that
than any
meeting.
notes are going to be. I sent you links. I sent you twice. I sent you links to the actual meetings themselves,
Right.
the
But-
videotape.
But maybe we need to reboot this. I mean, I'm sure you're right. So, but Ed, if you have, even if it's draft language, and we can decide whether we voted or didn't vote on it, but at least we can get it, you know, start it back up again. Because it is kind of core to what we were supposed to be doing. I think Carl's note, I don't know if it's Carl's or whoever's it is, you know, is core to what we're doing.
It's
if
been
we
so long
do,
since we
that's
talked
great.
about it. I agree that, you know, Bob has the draft, and he and I sort of worked on that. And then I think that he and I had presented that, and I think that nothing has changed in that presentation since we did it. So Bob,
Yeah,
do you
let's
think you
just
send that out
reboot
to
it.
the group?
Yeah, let's just reboot it. As far as like in the next agenda, you know, so for instance, to identify dog regulations for access to conservation in town-owned lands in Orleans. I think, Ed, you've done a ton of work listing what places you go on, you know, in terms of conservation, where you can, where you can't. I honestly don't recall the details of any of that, but my impression was a lot of it you couldn't go on, or if you could, you had to have a leash. I don't know if that's an issue to us. You know, I never heard anybody say we want to change it. And if, and I'm not arguing it, I'm just saying if that's the case, are we satisfied that that piece is fine and we don't have to address it? And I'm just asking, Carl has it here, we should decide yes or no. And if it is a problem, let's say, yes, it's still a problem, we want to address it. And then have it on our next agenda.
Yep.
Write down the list.
Hey, Bob, can you send out the draft language that we put together and presented? Or add it for the next meeting?
Yes.
And it may be, I'm kind of jumping around. Maybe if we could agree to go through this list methodically and not get off track, because I think the list Carl's put together is a good list. I mean, we all put it together, but he's the guy who's pulled it together. I certainly haven't done the work. But, you know, to strengthen enforcement of Orleans dog regulations, we have a question, you know, animal control officer enhancement. That's a good question. You know, you guys we had extensive conversation with the police. Carl's had more than any of us. We can decide, yes, it's something we want to propose that they do, or we can decide, yeah, we'd like to do it, but we don't know how, or we can decide we don't need it. But I mean, if we could just go through that list and start to think in those terms and then have that discussion at our next meeting to try to get it in or out of, or just as a placeholder in the list that we don't think we can do anything about. Is that, Carl, isn't that
Yeah.
kind of what you wanted to have happen?
That's what
through
I
this
wanted to
process?
do this. That's
Yeah.
what I wanted to do
Right.
this meeting. And so
Right.
again, I don't understand what would have been the problem to just go through that process.
I don't know.
What
I was
would we
trying.
have, what would we have lost if we had just gone, what would have been given up as sacrifice lost if we had gone through that process and just said, this is important, this is not important, we're not going to do anything, this we're going to allude to really quick in a report, we're not going to bother to do research. We could be done with that by now. I don't understand what was at stake. I don't get it.
Right. Yeah. Well, early
Instead,
on,
we have
I was
nothing.
making a motion to delete identified benefits of dog walking, but people didn't want to do that. So I'm not sure what it is. I'd be happy to do this at our next meeting and just plow through it. For my part, you know, and
That's how I look at it, but apparently we don't have a consensus on that. So that's why I feel stymied.
well, I don't know. Do folks not agree? I don't know. I'm not trying to bulldoze this. I just thought that this was and if we've got some of this done already and Ed and Barb have done that part, let's present it so we don't have to spend time on it again. We can say, oh yeah, that remember now, we don't have to deal with that. We've already decided that. That's fine. Is that what you guys are saying?
I don't think we've decided. I think we need to review what we've done to get our heads back wrapped around where we were, to see if there's any possibility of continuing our cadence of making effective decisions or recommendations. So we're not there yet because we haven't started the process, because I think we need to be working in order to be productive. And we're now sort of scoping and, getting our heads wrapped around where we were, and that's sometimes traumatic.
Patty, do you have anything to say about what's
I
going
don't know.
on?
It
You've
just
been
seems like we
awfully
go in
quiet.
circles and circles and circles, and different people argue with other people.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it should be that painful. I think we should just be able to have some decisions.
I agree.
Well, yeah, it seems like the agenda is, and now we don't have a lot of time to make up an agenda for the next one. But I think, if we are functionally making an agenda, then the next meeting, the agenda shouldn't really be debated. It should be moved through. And my experience of what's happening here is that, we have an agenda. Okay, granted, there wasn't a lot of opportunity, but I did offer to people that they could, comment about it online, and there was no feedback. And then in the meeting, it's like, well, let's do it a completely different way. And, let's skip all this and let's go back to the definition of control. I mean, the definition of control is going to come one way or another. But if it should have been on this agenda, if we were going to talk about it this weekend, we're going to advocate for the definition of control. I don't know. It just seems like we're getting dragged off onto things that don't move the agenda along. And many times we end up at the end of the meeting and we don't have a clear sense of what the agenda is for next time. So here we are again, and I don't have a good answer for what happens next.
Is anybody in favor of just simply saying the next agenda is approve the minutes and go through this list? It's just 2 items. Is that what we want to accomplish? I don't know and then to that end, if Ed and Bob or anybody else has information to add to this that makes that a faster process that we've already accomplished, send it out. And then when we get to it, we can simply go, yep, we did that, or I have a question, or.
And then we should add to it the item that we didn't get to it tonight, which is to look at our regulatory proposals and to clarify whether there's a scope issue there, because it was also mentioned in the midst of that. There was questioning of whether that stuff was in scope, and I think we have to get that settled one way or another. And if then, once we're done with that, you want to tie up the loose end of your definition of control, that's fine. Let's do that as well, would be my thought. I don't see any reason not to. What I have a problem with is that talking about that ends up torpedoing getting the other piece done. And now we have to do it next week instead of this week. And all of this in the context of, we've got to hurry up. It feels very inconsistent to me. It feels like it just ends up getting us completely bogged down. Just my take. So the proposed agenda then would be to go through these objectives, decide, yes, we're going to study them, no, we're not, or we're going to allude to them very quickly in a report, and that's going to be it. And to take responsibility, maybe if somebody wants to take point on writing up or doing research and then writing up, we'll do that. Then we'll take a look at the regulatory proposals, decide if anything's not in scope. And as soon as we've done that, we'll look at Bob and Ed's definition of control. And in the meantime, I will watch, I'm going to send you the meeting of the video of March 2nd, and I will time tag for you when we talk about that. So everybody's telling the same story about what happened the last time we got together. Does that all work?
May I respond?
Yes, please.
First of all, it's my recollection that Ed and I were given an assignment by the group. And the assignment was to address 85.2. We developed a draft, presented it, and it was passed out to every member of the committee. for purposes of them responding. And I have before me all of their responses. In editing it and making suggestions, we have prepared a statement that comes from the suggestions from our colleagues that needs to be brought back to the committee. I do not believe that there was ever a vote. What
Yeah,
I
I think I
believe is that
remember
we were
that.
given a responsibility of preparing this document for purposes of agreement and consensus. And by having everyone read it, make suggestions on the spot on how to change it and alter it, and then incorporate those, present it back and let people see it, we have finished something that could go into the report. That's how I see it.
Okay,
Now,
that's,
let me
okay.
continue.
Yep.
Agenda. I would agree with Ms. Reed that it's very hard to be a chair and also have strong opinions, because the chair's major responsibility is to seek consensus and help people arrive at it in such a way, for example, of giving time for people to respond to things and incorporating their responses and bringing it back for people to agree to. At the same time, I've always appreciated the work that you've done, and I've written and also told you how much I've appreciated some of the ideas that you've expressed. In determining an agenda, I would like to propose we go about determining our agendas in a different way. I would think that it would be helpful to simply have everyone send Carl what we think should be on the agenda for next time, and have Carl go through those and come up with an agenda. And Carl, you not elaborate and give your points of view on everything for the agenda, because there's a difference between trying to respond to what the items are on the agenda and trying to respond to what your point of view is of the items on the agenda. So if we can just get the agenda out, and I'd also propose it be a manageable number. Possibly, I think David was moving in this direction too, 3 or 4 items instead of 6, 7, 8 items, because we can't finish that many. We've never finished our agenda, our agendas actually. So if we could keep it a manageable number, I think 3 would be a good idea. There's nothing magical about how many, but a manageable number. So I'm ready to provide my thoughts on what I think the agenda would be, and I'd be happy to send those to you. And I don't know if other members would do that. David has some thoughts. I'm sure Patty does too. Okay. So that way we will have an agenda that the group prepared in a way that is different than an agenda and then being asked us to respond to something that is sent to us. Let's reverse it. Let's get the ideas from the group on what the agenda ought to be. That would be my suggestion.
Okay, so I have 2 comments about that. The first is that when we do the agenda at the end of the meeting, that is what tends to happen. So this is, this agenda, we didn't have a meeting to prepare.
I
But the
understand.
typical, and okay, and the other thing is, it's just very important to little point of procedural order here. The definition of control that you're working on is one way to approach defining control. There's a competing possibility as to how to do it. So if we like your definition of control as you have framed it, we're not ready to go into a report with that, because we then have to say, okay, of these 2 approaches to defining control, which one is better and why? That's where we're at in our process. Okay, as far as I see it anyway. So I just want to clarify that, because there's and it's in the material that I sent out. If you read what it says about the definition of control, all of this about how there's 2 different ways to do it and what questions might be asked about this one versus that one and so forth is all in there. So it's nothing new. And I just want us to be aware of that when we convene next week or next time.
So let's just
I-
focus on that.
Yeah,
That's something,
exactly.
that's one of the agenda items. Let's
Yeah,
just,
and that would be our agenda item.
Yeah,
And
Great.
that's what I would propose that. And I would like just as quickly to say that I don't see different ideas as competing. I see different ideas as contributing to getting a better product. So the issue isn't for me which one. The issue is how can we take what we have and create something that's meaningful?
and I was just gonna, for my part, Carl's been doing the heavy lifting. I'm happy to have you do the agenda. I'm glad you've done it, but let's next meeting, like I said, let's make it shorter. And if that's a core issue, Bob send, I don't even remember all this stuff, to be honest with you, and it gets so buried in this huge list we have. We need to, let's pick the core items, focus on those and
Sure.
address them, debate it,
Well-
figure how we want to address it.
Just as a reminder, I held this up at 7:33, and
Right.
the intention there was to have us stop talking and to collectively do an agenda at that time. Because,
I missed that.
as I have explained in emails to you, I wanted to slow down at 7:30
Mhm.
for a hard stop at 7:45 for Ed.
Mhm.
And between 7:30 and 7:45, together craft the agenda. So
Okay.
just telling you,
Okay.
that's how I saw
I
it.
couldn't read your thing. Sorry, it was too. I didn't
Okay,
pick it up.
but
It was
that
too
was-
close.
I
You could just tell
want-
us.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt. I was trying
Yeah.
to be
That's
polite.
okay.
Okay, are we done then, I guess?
Yeah.
Are people gonna send me, people are gonna send me their agenda suggestions, and we're gonna try to keep it really boiled down to in or out on the objectives, in or out on the regulatory proposals, and looking at this particular approach to definition of control, yes?
Fine with me.
That's, okay. All right, move to adjourn?
Can
No?
you ask for if people agree to that?
Yeah. Is that what, am I hearing correctly?
For me, I would like to see our agenda address the issue of when do we want to send the report to the select board? When do we want to get our work done? I would like that on the agenda. The second item I would like on the agenda would be that anyone who has written something that they think is coming from our previous research and discussions that they think would be useful to put in to a report to the select board in the form of recommendations and the reasoning behind them, to be able to bring forward those documents so that we can include them in the report if we decide to start writing the report. The third thing I would like on the agenda would be to determine who's going to write the report. And if Ms. Reed does get a chance from the select board of saying, this is like when we would have, and she could give us a range of times so that it's not, I don't feel rushed at all in writing a report. But if we could get a deadline for it, I'd rather have it be a time in which we could work toward accomplishing. I'm sure the board is flexible, and if we come up with saying we need more time, they would be willing to consider that. But we need something, particularly since the charge itself did not state that.
Because of the open meeting laws, our agenda does not include a discussion about your group for Wednesday night. As soon as I can get an official answer on that is 2 weeks from Wednesday if I raise the issue this coming week.
That would be very helpful, I think.
Okay, you got it.
So those are the agenda items that I think we need to address. And might I say that what's behind my agenda items is the fact that I think one can get consensus and also get clarity by looking at something that is written, as well as being able to talk it through. So starting from talking is one way, starting from something written is another, and both of those are legitimate. And I think it's time that we get something written. and we talk from what's written. And we've done that before in the past, and I think it's time to return to it.
Anyone else have a comment before we adjourn? All right, so move to adjourn.
Second it.
All in favor? Do we have to say our names now, Andrea? No? Okay. All in
Thanks, guys.
favor? Anyone?
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.